This morning at approximately 7:37 a.m., we had a Sears radio activation at the high school, which indicated an active shooter situation. An officer first arrived within 7 minutes of that activation and located multiple gunshot victims. We're still unclear of exactly how many are injured or what the extent of those are, but we're working on that right now. There is no further danger to the public. The community is safe. We're just now working backwards, trying to figure out everything that happened and make notifications. There'll be another update later on today. It's still very early. This happened at approximately 7:37 this morning. School didn't start yet, luckily, so there was very few students and faculty in the building, which I think contributed to a good outcome in that sense. But we'll have more information later on this afternoon. We will not be releasing any more information in the meantime. So please be patient with us so that we can talk with these victims and their families and try and figure out what happened. We won't be answering any questions today either, or right now. We'll let you know later on this afternoon, what time we'll be meeting back with you again, and we hope to provide more detail then.
So can we, just to be clear, you don't have a number of people who were injured in this?
We're still working on that.
Have you identified the shooter?
Yes.
What's their current status? Are they alive? Or?
We'll get to that later on this afternoon.
Can you confirm if the shooter was a student at the school?
I can't confirm that right now.
Can you confirm any deaths?
No, not right now.
Reunification center for families and students right now?
Great point. The reunification center has already been established, and at most of those, I think all the kids have been reunified already. So we're good in that area. Thank you.
Were there any faculty members that were hurt?
I can't answer that question yet.
Have you made any apprehensions or arrests?
Can't answer that question yet either.
We'll take no further questions at this time. We'll see you this afternoon.
Sorry, just wanted to make sure.
We'll let you know. We don't know.
Iowa Department of Public Safety will push out a message as far as location and time of the next press conference.
Okay.
So if you go to the Iowa Department of Public Safety website, it'll be posted there probably
Shortly after noon.
Shortly after noon. I'm sorry?
Any surveillance video available?
There's nothing more that we're going to be able to
thank you.
answer right now.
We'll
Thank
be
you.
back.
Okay, not a lot of information there. We still have former Boston Police Commissioner Ed Davis with us. Ed, I think, help me understand, because if I'm a parent or my husband or wife works at that school, I would be incredibly frustrated as to, I'm sure they're probably sharing it with details with parents, hopefully, and with others, but to not even to tell the media whether or not it's children that have been injured or killed, or if it's faculty or anything, why even say anything at all then? What was the point of that press conference?
Right, Vlad. It is a very charged moment right now in Perry, and it is frustrating to see a lack of transparency. However, this sheriff is clearly emotionally affected by this. And in addition to that, you have to understand that behind that sheriff are local and state prosecutors, county prosecutors and state prosecutors who are driving the decisions on what can be released. And so everybody looks towards the prosecution and the protection of the victim's rights. But in some cases, and especially in jurisdictions that don't deal with these things, big events like this frequently, they err on the side of caution. And I think that's what you're seeing here today. They're keeping things very close to the vest. They understand the international attention this gets, but sometimes they overdo the protective thing, in my estimation. But remember, each jurisdiction is on their own, and the process, I'm sure the governor's office is involved in this, the prosecutors, it's a very complex decision.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And what I know, everyone wants to know what's going on and whether or not their loved one is involved. But there is also an investigation that's going on. And he mentioned that he has already ID'd the shooter, but wasn't willing to give that name up. And I would presume right about now, there are probably investigators heading to that shooter's house if they're not already there. And the last thing that they want is a bunch of media following them.
Correct. Yeah, they'll respond immediately as soon as they get an address on the person, and they may not execute a search warrant. They may secure the facility. So what that entails is going into the home, removing anyone from the home that's there, and locking it down until they can get the proper court paperwork to do a search.
Yeah. And so, all right. So, what can you expect will happen in the next couple of hours? I mean, we know that there's a staging area that has been set up for parents and others. What is sort of the next? I mean, you mentioned something that I think is become sadly tragically common now, which is the number of federal officials and prosecutors that are already on the scene, including, we know, the FBI and the ATF.
Right. The coordination on the law enforcement side is a massive undertaking, and it usually is as good as the practice that's been done in the facility beforehand. So, do the federal agents know the local officers? Do the local officers know the state officers? Can they sit down effectively? And as I say in briefings that I do, you can't make a relationship during a crisis. It has to be in place beforehand, and hopefully that's the case. And they're having these meetings right now, and that'll involve every level of government. But the other side of this is the victim side, and having people who are in charge of taking care of the victims' families, taking care of the victims, doing the notifications, all of the other work that needs to be done here is really a complex undertaking in and of itself, and somewhat separate from the law enforcement response.
All right. So one of the things that we're sort of grappling with here is, and I know that there will be people that are going to say that this is the politicization of what is happening, that we should be focused on the tragedy. But given that we don't have a lot of information, and given that you're the former police commissioner of a very big city, I just want to get your thoughts on the fact that we've increasingly, since Columbine, seen school shootings, mass shootings happening across the country. Is it in your mind, and this is perhaps in your experience, but also partly in your opinion, the fact that Americans have more access to weapons than they've ever had before? I mean, think about to when, Ed, you started out as a beat cop. Can you give us a distinction between what you were facing as a beat cop in Boston when you first joined the police force to ultimately what the young guy who joined the force when you were police commissioner was dealing with when it came to members of the public and whether they had access to the weapons, and especially the types of weapons that they have access to now?
Oh, it's a world of difference. My first 2 years on the job as a walking police officer, I took 2 guns off people in 2 years. And now my son is a detective and is seeing guns every day or at least every week. So the frequency of encounters has gone way up. And I think it's a terrible comment on our society that our children can't go to school without fearing something like this. This was just unheard of in the late 1970s when I came on the job, and now we've evolved to a point where it's almost an acceptable situation, and that is tragic. It's a terrible comment on us, our political structure, and this historical part of our country.
It must be frustrating as somebody who's, spent a career in law enforcement to watch these conversations in politics come and go. And one of the things that I thought to myself was, we've been covering a lot of politics. A lot of national reporters are in Iowa because of the caucuses. And so over and over, we've been talking about what the concerns of voters are. What do they care about in Iowa? Gun violence has actually not come up.
I know.
Right? We've talked a lot
remarkable.
about the economy and immigration, blah, blah, blah. I'm going to put money on gun violence because it's happening right here, right now. It's going to rise to the surface temporarily in the conversation. And then it's going to sort of slip right back away.
I don't know. It's Iowa, which is a conservative state where my guess is that because we've seen this play out over and over again, that members of the United States Senate, conservative governors, no matter, I mean, you would have thought that things would have changed after what happened in Connecticut. Nothing has.
Right. So,
Ed, I don't know what your thoughts are on that. We're sort of, at this point, because we don't have a lot of information, we're sort of getting into now sort of macro ideas and analysis about gun violence overall in this country.
It's really disturbing. As someone who's been to hundreds of homicide scenes, I have very strong feelings about this, and why we can't have a rational conversation and come up with some effective ways to prevent this from happening. Let's look at the data. Let's look at studies. Let's find out evidence-based practices that can reduce the possibility of your children or grandchildren being murdered by some maniac. There's got to be a way that we can do this, and it requires coming together, but it's tragic that we can't.